you want to identify what case you would be heard on this motion? Go ahead.
Judge, I filed this motion, and on behalf of Mary DeCamp, she's my only client. So I would suggest that this is State of Arizona versus Mary DeCamp.
Okay. And obviously, any ruling would probably affect the rest. No, but they can bring the same motion, right?
Yeah, they can, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you rule correctly, it probably would be persuasive.
And save the city some money.
Bill and I go back a long time. It hasn't changed one bit. Okay. So we'll call State of Arizona to our defense. Motion has got a right here. You know, for file number, Bill, which one is
One
yeah, so we're only getting married. Okay. Oh, all of them. Okay. I see. Okay, CR. I'm just going to enter the last three numbers just for identification of the files. It goes 291-554, 497-072, 286, 428, 937, 241, 404, 276, 601, 423, 845, 073, 638, 789, 495, 336, 682, 530, 021, 516, 638, 328, 712, 650, 070, 682, 999, 123, 306, 280, 523, and 371. Council will announce themselves for the record, please, Alan.
Alan Merritt, representing the city.
Okay.
Bill Reisner, representing Mary DeCamp.
Okay. And let the record show audit what?
Audit AZ.
Audit AZ.
Stands for Americans United for Democracy,
Okay.
Integrity, and Transparency.
Are permitted to photograph as long as there's no disruption to the court. I know you won't, John. So.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And that's with the consent of the state and the defense. Okay. So how do you want to proceed? That's your motion.
Judge, I have, I think, probably 4 witnesses that I want to call.
Okay. Do you want to make any pre-hearing motions by either one, or any? Do you want to make a little opening statement? I know it's not a trial. Anything? I just start calling witnesses. You may.
Yeah, let me just, not really by way of argument, but sort of summary as to what we're involved with is, I think it's critical for evaluation of a constitutional issue, particularly a First Amendment issue, that we talk about some things, especially since the city has raised some defenses. So what I think these folks hopefully will explain to you is sort of what this Occupy Tucson event and assembly and group is about. What's their message? How are they organized? How's that message transmitted? How's it understood by the public? Why? Because the city is trying to assert a rule that says, boom, at 10:30 at night, you can't be there until 6 in the morning. Why that's useful and effective for the organization. That sort of stuff, because the First Amendment issues relate to the message that's going out to the public. Is the public receiving the message, and why are they doing it, and how they organize? Because authentic First Amendment expression, authentic assembly has an important role. Obviously, that's at the top of the list with our.
I'll interrupt you, Bill. In this particular case for the court to determined more on the assembly side rather than limiting any speech at all?
Well,
I understand they probably go together in a case. I mean, you assemble, have speech, and express yourself, whatever your feelings are, your beliefs. But with the regulation of the park, is the issue, the big issue, does the city have the authority, either safety, health, and welfare, or some sort of issue, to restrict the use of the park for a certain time with reasonable notice and legitimate legal reasons? Isn't that the issue?
no.
No.
Okay. That's,
Go right ahead.
that's not the issue.
Okay.
And the reason that one of the reasons why that's not the issue is if you take a look at the city ordinance, which is attached to the motion to response of the city, they've attached the ordinance and they've attached some minutes of what happened at the mayor and council meeting, and everything in that ordinance relates to, if you look at the kind of events that happen in the park, they relate to picnics in the park, serving beer in the park, certain entertainment, all that kind of stuff. There's absolutely nothing in there that relates to political uses or political expression. Well, yeah, because they, all these cases will talk about how if it affects your First Amendment rights and assemblies, you have to narrowly draw the statute. They use the term narrowly tailored. So my argument is, this thing isn't tailored, let alone narrow. What they've done is, my analogy, it'd be like sometimes maybe the government says, here's a drug you can use for this disease. And then somebody else is prescribing, trying to use it for something totally different. They've created some rules for a variety of uses in the park, but none of them relate to or at all to political activity. And they rely, for instance, on this Clark case with the U.S. Supreme Court and the National Mall, and the park's got a bunch of rules that all relate to politics. They're in fact narrowly drawn because they have demonstrations there all the time. So I think it isn't an issue of like, could the city draw up ordinances in the park that relate to certain political uses that are narrowly tailored that can affect First Amendment rights and stuff. Because I actually don't think they've done it in this case. One of the witnesses, I think, can tell you that Dick Kaiser was participating with the Occupy group and the city where they were trying to frame an ordinance that would deal with this sort of thing, deal with political activities in the park. This one is blind to it. That's why it's a little bit of a different issue than you might have perceived.
Okay, thank you. Alan, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, Your Honor, I do, just briefly. Your Honor, if you accept Mr. Reisner's reasoning, then the city doesn't have any authority to regulate any activity in the park. Any special interest group that wants to come forward could make exactly the same arguments that Mr. Reisner is making, in that my particular activity is not envisioned by these ordinances. And it's telling that he says that these are blind to political considerations. That's exactly right, Judge. They are blind. They are strictly content neutral. Mr. Reisner and his group and the Occupy Tucson people and Mary DeCamp want to substitute their judgment for the best way to administer the parks in the city of Tucson for the people that are charged with that administration of the parks. They believe that they should be allowed to do whatever they want to do, and that does not benefit the common good that they insist on. When they come in and they occupy the parks during the closed hours, that's in contravention of the ordinance, and there are certain provisions in the care and the maintaining and the aesthetic value of the parks that requires a certain amount of rest, if you will. In addition, we will submit to the court that the witnesses that Mr. Reisner proposed it seems to me that this is a legal issue for the court to decide. Does the First Amendment trump the ordinance of the city? That's basically it. So if you're going to allow the testimony from the witnesses, Your Honor, I would ask that you would place a time limit on them, something reasonable. I'm not trying to silence them, but perhaps we could limit the amount of time we're going to spend. Thank you.
No problem with that.
Well, no, Judge, I certainly will attempt to focus on the issues before the court takes.
Okay. Well, I guess you two said it a different way than I did, so there's three ways here, I guess. We'll figure it out as we go, okay? And we can start then, if you wish, Bill. You can call
Yeah, Dave Curto.
Right up here, Dave. Please right on, sir. You sound swear or affirm, Justice Adventures.
I do.
Okay, sir. Please state your full name. Record, please, Dave.
My name is David Henry Croteau.
How do you spell your last name, Dave?
Croteau, and we're using the French pronunciation. My family's divided. I prefer Croteau.
Oh, Croteau. I see. Oh, yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'll be asking questions, but the judge, the guy, needs to hear you.
American.
You're active with the Occupy Tucson group. Would that be correct?
That's correct. As early as sleeping there last night.
Incidentally, were you involved with the initial organization of the group in Tucson?
Yes, I was. I was at the very first General Assembly and the subsequent General Assemblies, as well as a meeting with city officials the 3 days prior to the first occupation at Armory Park.
Could you just, in a sort of a little short bit, maybe give the judge some information about your political activity in the background and history and citizen activity?
Yes. I'm a lifelong Tucsonan judge, and I have served the community since very young. I entered the Army in 1969 and served 2.5 years. When I got out, I was invited to join Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 106, and was its third president. At that time, we created an event that used the city parks called Nam Jam, and we've subsequently had about 26 years history. I've been credited with the founder of Nam Jam, and it was to gather Vietnam veterans together to help stop suicides of our returning veterans. I first heard about the Occupy Washington, D.C. Following an event that happened last December 16, 2010, when 135 veterans chained themselves to the White House in protest to the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. These veterans subjected to civil disobedience that started the wave. The next day, the events that happened across the world prompted by a young man who started himself on fire. Vietnam Veterans of America were not a part of this, but Veterans for Peace are. I have joined Veterans for Peace, and it's been with Veterans for Peace that I kept in contact with those organizers who established the Occupy event that was in Washington, D.C., starting October 6th of 2011. And it was following the thread and information of this group that I recognized the connection to Occupy Wall Street that occurred in September. And having watched the political movement and wanting to participate, I was at our first, when I heard about the General Assembly for Occupy Tucson, I was at that first General Assembly representing Veterans for Peace. And Veterans for Peace, like they have declared nationwide, are standing in solidarity with the Occupy movement. I was made the vice keeper at the first General Assembly and have maintained a presence in the Occupy Tucson's Peacekeeping and Security Working Group.
Dave, what's the vibes keeper? What's that?
A consensus form of meeting management, even formal consensus. People are assigned roles rather than a chairman who runs the meeting. So we have facilitators, we have note groundskeepers, we have greeters. There's about 6 or 7 defined roles. And vineskeeper is to observe the meeting and see where someone's point might be missed because they're shy and not there, or that somebody is overbearing and needs to be reminded of the need for being at peace and discussing our meeting in a respectful way.
So at the initial meeting, do I have a group of citizens got together who were wanting to do an occupation to bring issues forward similar to what you had seen occurring in other parts of the country?
Absolutely. The first General Assembly was held at the Unisource building on private property. And after about an hour into the meeting, it was moved to Vente de Augusto Park. And the purpose of the First General Assembly was to establish our solidarity with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And the startup date would be similar to startup dates of occupations around the world.
And approximately how many people attended that?
The first General Assembly, we had about 100. The second General Assembly, when it was held at Vente de Augusto, we had about 200 to 250.
Okay. And this was before tents went in and before the occupation itself occurred?
Correct. It was October 9th that the second General Assembly was held, and the intention and the agreement was to occupy Armory Park. Our original consensus was Vente de Augusto, but when the issue of Tucson Meet Yourself was brought into existence, the community didn't want to interfere with the community at large, so it was moved to Armory Park to accommodate that.
Okay. So let me see if I'm following this. The initial plan was to utilize the Vente de Augusto Park.
Correct.
And was that related to the visibility, the location of that park?
Yeah, absolutely, because of the sentiment with Occupy Washington, D.C. being in the hub of our city center's core was there. In addition, that second General Assembly had the organizers of Tucson Meet Yourself to address our General Assembly. And the woman was there very much in solidarity with us, but was concerned about our occupying it. And it was her concern that the location was moved to Armory Park prior to our first occupation, which was the 15th of October.
Okay. And during this process, had you all been in consultation with the city or the police to let them know what was occurring?
Numerous attempts were made when a captain, I believe, came to the Occupy General Assembly on the 9th, stating that he would be the liaison, and we expressed our interest in working with the TPD at that General Assembly that was at Vente de Augusto, because we were asked by police and the security at the Unisource building to move to City Park. So we established with a captain at that time. It might have been a sergeant, then a captain, but we arranged for a meeting with city officials at the Armory Park Visitor Center, in which Assistant Chief Klein, City Parks Director Gray, our legal team, our president from Veterans for Peace, several other city officials, an attorney for the TPD was there, and we discussed our intention to occupy, and that was a Thursday prior to the occupation of Armory Park.
And when the occupation occurred at Armory Park, was that an exclusive use of the park?
We had no permit, but we discussed with the city officials that prior Thursday that we intended to be there. We intended to accommodate people for around the clock. We would have porta potties set up. We would have a kitchen. We intended to occupy the park. And we made it very clear to the city officials we were going to be nonviolent in protest to address our grievances.
While you were at the park, were other citizens able to use the park that weren't part of the Occupy?
That's been the case throughout the occupation, almost to our disadvantage sometimes.
So the parks have always been open regardless of your presence?
Without prejudice, absolutely.
And when you were at the Armory Park, was that a useful location for your purposes?
It actually worked out better than Mente de Augusto. That became very problematic when we unceremoniously moved. What we were able to do at Armory Park, Judge, was to create the intended community to support the movement. And because we were so reaffirming that everyone would be welcome and that everyone, 100%, not just 99%, would be welcome. And because of that, that was the standard from the beginning.
What were the issues and that the group was concerned with, that they were trying to be involved with politically relating to the common good of the society?
The challenge, Judge, was holding back all of the messages as we had. We had many issues. The list of things that we wanted to address our government began with our right for freedom of assembly in our First Amendment. So our first and strongest concern was being able to be there 24/7 to protest. And so a lot of our energy in the first month and a half was simply to establish that presence as we began to continue to list our issues. Because every time a new General Assembly occurred, somebody else had another issue they wanted to address.
Incidentally, these General Assemblies, how often did they occur?
For the first, I believe, about a month at Armory Park, they were daily. Actually, twice a day. We would have them at noon for the encampment people, and then in the evening at 7 for those who were supporters.
How did you get the word out from the meetings?
Well, the very first announcement that I knew about the Occupy Tucson was done on Facebook, and it grew with email lists each time we gathered. At the first assembly, we passed it out that way.
While you were at the park, were there political signs at the park relating to certain issues?
The energy and desire for people to message was profound. And there was actually a working group. One of the first ones formed was the art working group, that we would have sign material and paints and materials. And that was very much an involved activity from the day one. We were making signs and protesting.
And in addition to being at the park, was the park a locus for marches and protests and disseminating the information to a wider community?
As that has been the case throughout this. We have had protests this morning at the bank. The Center for Protest has been sometimes been taken advantage by people like MoveOn.org and the other organizations that want to get on the bandwagon, that this protest has galvanized citizens across the country. So yes.
When you were at the park, among the working groups, did you have IT, a technology group there?
From day one, IT working group has been an integral part of both our Occupy, and it keeps us connected to both that Washington, D.C. occupation that started on October 6th, as well as occupiers nationwide. So IT has been essential. We've often had live streaming of our General Assemblies, but certainly have continued to build a thread of the Occupy movement and our local protest on that, using the information technology component and working group.
And then are they involved with the face group link that lets the wider audience that is participating with Occupy know what's going on?
I'd say the biggest of all of our internet connections has been with Facebook. It started us, but we also have had a OccupyTucson.org. We have had other identifying internet or communication things associated with Occupy Tucson, and each of the working groups have associated connections to the internet. But it started and primary still is Facebook.
And this Facebook situation, is that a situation where people can friend or be linked with it that are part of the larger group?
That is our best indication of the support we could get.
Friends are enemies, right?
Well, there's not foes in this case. You know, I for years was a commenter on the Stars website.
Girlfriend, boyfriend, breaking up, that would be not surprising.
I'm answering a technical question because Facebook has a friend process, and what our numbers added up within, I'd say within the first month and a half, 8,000 people who friended us.
So that's essentially part of a wider network that you're communicating with and is going to your site to get information.
And the way we know that success in those numbers is the support we've got from people who are not occupying. I've boldly said there's 1,000 for everyone that's sleeping that support us. And it's probably in the hundreds per person that's actually sleeping in the park. And because the things that we need just seem to show up when supporters wanted to come and bake a cake for us or cook a whole soup meal. And that's been the continuous support of Occupy. Is supporters who have come out, have read our threads, seen what our needs were. When we needed more tents arrived through that network.
Were there other groups that use Armory Park while your group was present?
You know, there's been several associated. Because Armory Park was already booked for other events, when we discovered we were at Armory Park and there was going to be a conflict coming with two events that was scheduled. One was the Tour de Tucson and the other was the All Souls Procession of Little Angels, who had reserved the park. At our General Assembly the week before the All Souls event was scheduled, the organizer there came and said that we could share this park. They didn't need a whole lot, and quite frankly, they needed volunteers. So at the General Assembly, we heard the concern of the organizers of the Little Angels Procession, and we had organized support of that we would move the tents to accommodate their reservation with the park in a good way. Unfortunately, that was undermined by TPD when on the Thursday prior to the All Saints events, approximately 80 officers and the media who knew about it showed up with spotlights, and I believe it was around midnight, 10:30 at the closing time, we were told that we would all have to vacate the park and move the 20 de Augusto Park. And so the opportunity to help with the Little Angels kind of went with that, with having to set up a new encampment, not to our liking. We had adjusted our encampment at Armory Park to accommodate peacekeepers who wanted to keep the security. We did have some breaches early on at Armory Park with people who were there just to disrupt the activity, and by organizing our tents in a circle and having a gate, if you will, we were able to have family night where parents came with their children and protested at Armory Park. But because we were moved, and we were told it was because they needed to get the parks ready for the Tour de Tucson, who was going to have it the following weekend, that we would have to leave and they would not work with us, even though they were invited, and that we would work with them. We would leave the park so they could occupy it completely and then return. But because we were moved to 20 de Augusto Park, the ability of Occupy Tucson to grow in an intended community that we had planned on was disrupted for months. We never really recovered until we could get our still intention is to occupy a bigger park, and we're now at the corner of Speedway and Stone on an easement. As we've evolved with our community, we did accommodate, we intended to share the use with the planned organizers who reserved the park in a good way.
So when you left Armory Park, how long did it take you all to pack up?
We had totally moved an encampment of close to 100 people and 100 tents, roughly, within 2 hours, and left the park without a cigarette butt. We left it immaculate. The only compromise to the city property was some yellow spots where our tents stayed in the park. But there was no trash, nothing, within 2 hours.
During the occupation, did events occur after 10:30.
Oh, absolutely. We had, one of the things we discovered with the Occupy Tucson, that people in different lifestyles were attracted to us. And some are up all night, some are up in the daytime. We had around-the-clock activities. I mentioned the family night when we were at the park, at Armory Park. We invited families to come with their children to Occupy. At this time, we had established a very good relationship with TPD. They were accommodating. I was with Chief Sonora the first night of the occupation when he made a decision like no other police chief in the nation, that he would not be there to infringe on our rights, but enforce the law. So that precedent's been at 10:30. He came out, and everyone who was in the park was cited. We were so willingly to protest that people were waiting in line. But this one family night, one of the officers, I believe it was Lieutenant Webb, but it might have been another TPD representative, came to us and says, if you're going to have children in the park with their parents who are resting, they're subject to an additional charge. Parents who engage their children with illegal acts would be arrested. And since many people did not want to take citations, using their First Amendment right after the 10:30 would go to the sidewalk, and they would wait in the sidewalk to not take citations. And the parents who came in the park did not want to risk their children's custody or any of that. So they, in their pajamas, went out to the sidewalk and accommodated the illegal act of being in the park by not being illegal, by expressing their First Amendment right after 10:30 with their children. So they were not subject to this additional penalty.
Did you all have political movies, educational movies with political themes shown at the park?
We used the IT technicians on many occasions to do that, but one of the Occupy movement's themes is teach-ins. Every day is a teach-in, and those of us who have been with this Occupy from the beginning have learned a lot. And the whole process of coming together to address our grievances was able to frame this teaching opportunity. So yes, I know we had a movie for children that night, that we had family night, and we've constantly had opportunities to share the issues with the community of Occupy Tucson so that we can all come to speed on the really vastness of our agenda.
Has the ability to be in the park at a location for 24 hours been useful in achieving your goals and getting your message out?
Well, it has. At one point when we were still at Armory Park, we occupied Vente Adesco, a few people, and the library. And what that illustrates for me is that we do have in Tucson people whose culture is in midnight, some people's culture is during the day, and sometime at the evening. So it seemed like we broke off into three parts that all got consolidated into one, which was problematic for us.
Just for the record, put on the record just where Armory Park is at the end of the August. So we have because he asked a question, is it pretty important to have it in the Central Park?
Okay.
Tell us where that is.
Okay, Armory Park is about approximately 5 blocks from Vente de Augusto Park. And its proximity is across the street from the library, the Children's Library, our old main library here in Tucson. And
down a block away from Superior Court.
It is from Superior Court, I'd say 4 blocks.
South 6th Avenue.
It's South 6th Avenue
And within the city.
and absolutely within the city. And because the veterans were the inspiration.
Armory's up there with Speedway where you are now.
No, Speedway and Stone is Anza Park.
The Anza.
We've been corrected by Parks Department. You can check on it. It is really, they misnamed it. It's not the Anza, it's Anza Park.
Oh.
It was given to the city by the Anza family, and it has some restrictions. But it's not the same as Armory Park. It's definitely different.
All right. But,
Yeah, and Vente de Agosto is just that green area in between Broadway and Congress next to the courthouse, right?
It essentially is a large median between Congress and Broadway where they join. And just as a side note, as a native Tucsonan, the artist who designed that landscape architecture was copying Mount Lemmon So it was made with rolling hills and big boulders that would replicate the top of Mount Lebanon, including the trees. And
Correct.
but it was essentially immediate, to answer your
The
question.
record is quite complete on what Occupy Tucson is about, where they're at, and our philosophy, and so forth. What I want to do now is get to the issue here.
Well, I don't think it's complete, so
How far you got to go?
well, I want to call another witness.
Oh, no, I know that, but with this gentleman, Dave,
No, I'm actually
you're actually done.
about done with,
About
yeah.
done. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Well, perhaps the city has some.
I know, but you're done?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, Alan, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Just one question, Your Honor. Mr. Croteau, you don't know how many people were discouraged from using the park by the occupation, do you, sir?
No, of course not.
Nothing, sir?
Please sit down, Dave. Thank you.
Dick Kaiser?
Morning, sir.
Morning.
You now swear or affirm or jump to acknowledge.
I do.
Okay, and your name is Dick Kaiser?
Richard Kaiser.
Richard Kaiser, and how do you spell your last name, Richard?
K-A-I-S-E-R.
Gotcha, sir. Okay, thank you. Okay, Bill, you may proceed.
Yeah. Should I call you Dick or Rick? Okay. And to give your address for the record here.
1562 East Painted Colt Loop, Tucson, near Prince and Mountain.
Could you also just sort of give a little capsule summary of some of your political activities to the judge in Tucson and otherwise?
All right. I'm a native Wisconsin resident.
From where? What city?
Well, I grew up in Milwaukee.
Madison, so we're...
Well, I graduated from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I also have a master's degree in curriculum instruction from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. The last several years, have been living in both northern Wisconsin and Door County, and a resident here in the city. My politics, I've been an activist for over 40 years, 45 years, starting as a school teacher, being active in a nascent teachers union, teaching and working as a union steward in that position. I got very active in professionalizing teachers, moved on to training teachers for a number of years, became a school administrator, and felt that the positions that the school board was taking were not correct, and became public in groups expressing that. I exercised my First Amendment rights at every opportunity when I felt things weren't going right. So I feel very comfortable in the experiences I've had, including most recently being co-chair of Democracy for America here in Tucson, the Tucson chapter. And we were involved in numerous activities, public activities. And when I heard about what was happening in the world and common people were being, the way I would characterize it, bludgeoned by a system that wasn't working in their behalf, last a year ago approximately for Arab Spring, I knew it was coming to this country and I wanted to be a part of it. I own my own business. I was a school administrator for 18 years prior to that. Successfully had a business for 13 years and retired at age 65, 6 years ago.
Did you yourself receive a citation as part of the Occupy event?
I did. It has been dismissed, but I did, and I did it deliberately. I have not been, Mr. Croto mentioned about as many as 100 occupiers, but the actual number of day occupiers is considerably larger than that. Now, they're not down there every day. I'm not down there every day. But we have varying degrees of commitment to being there. And one of the ways we committed was to take a citation, deliberately going to the park after 10:30, knowing that the officers would be there to stand and be counted and accept a citation on behalf of the First Amendment. That's what we felt, not felt, we continue to feel, is an overriding concern about the movement, more broadly speaking. The underpinning is the First Amendment and our right to speak up.
Have you had a sort of a special involvement with one of the working groups with Occupy Tucson?
Well, I've been involved with several of them. Initially, it was the welcome table, because that's where we met the public. The people would come down, strangers, they were strangers to us, we were strangers to them. They were coming down to say, what is this all about? Or how can I help? Or give me more information about something, or what's going on tomorrow or today. I'm down here at 3, is there something going on? We would tell them what the schedule was. We would engage with them on the whole matter of the occupation movement broadly and also specific to Tucson, because the occupation movement is a local movement. It's broad in its geography, but it's targeted to the communities. We've had events occur here that could have never occur anywhere else regarding TUSD and the Mexican American Studies program. That was unique to Tucson, but we're also involved in protesting bank actions that have put people out on the street from their homes. And so that welcome table was sort of a spot where people could then connect. They would join working groups. They would start attending general assemblies. They might be 24/7 campers, occupiers, that needed to talk to somebody. They were thinking about becoming part of it. They wanted to know that it would be a good fit for them. Not for a place to flop, but a place to engage, even with their limited means. If homelessness was a part of their life, they needed to also know that they could express themselves politically in that environment. There were people who had tents and wanted to be there, but we're not going to be there every night, but they were going to be there a lot of the time because they believed in the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week occupation. They believed in the concept, and they wanted to be active as much as they could. So that was the first part that I connected with. And, I can't say it was a life-altering experience, but I met people there that I will remember forever. And their own stories, because they wanted to hear ours, but they also had a story to tell about their own plight or their own need to express themselves. But then I moved on to a variety of committees, the Donations Committee, not committee, but working group, which I felt was an integral part of it because we needed funds to operate. Also the Legislative Committee, which became very important as time went on. And I could go on at some length about particular things in that committee. And there were others that I've said. Many of these working groups do not have working group members. There is a fluidity within it. If someone joins it and they stay with it, as long as they're constructively participating in it, they can do something to move the process forward, and they may back off later on. So, there isn't a listing. We may have our working groups, but we don't have names for all of them.
Let me ask you, you mentioned the donations thing. Does having a presence in that park 24 hours a day have a positive effect on donations?
Absolutely. At the beginning, we were getting donations from every corner of, I can actually say this, every corner of Tucson's community, money was coming in. From those who had very little to those of significant means were making donations. And a lot of it had, I would say, to the extent I can reflect on it, a lot of it had to do with the fact we were there. There was this energy being focused in one place. And it was there. It's like a heartbeat. It's there. We're establishing a beachhead, if you will. We're saying you can't cross this line. It's not private property, it's our property. It's everybody's property. It's the 99%, it's everybody's property. And we have a right to be here because the Constitution says that. And people responded. I mean, we're talking about people who don't have money issues in their life at all. They're taken care of in one respect or other. But they knew this was important because they followed what's been happening in the world. And in the special place that we are in the United States, in our history of free speech.
Dick, you were involved with, I think, a legislative initiative. Early before we started, made some remarks to the judge about that. Could you tell the court what that involved?
Yeah. I think the way to start with it is that because there's no template, there's no game book for something like this, things occur. They just sort of bubble up. And so people bring their own unique creativity to the situation, and as problems develop, such as regular citations and being a distraction to the issues that we had in mind, not that we weren't ready to deal with them directly, but they were a distraction and they were a weight around the movement. So the question was, how can we respond constructively to this? And the decision was, we need to go to the elected officials in the community and express ourselves with them and find out what they thought. And so we established a legislative working group. And we met separately to sort of hash out what would be our approach. And early on, we actually had council members attending occupation events. They, of their own volition, were coming down. In some cases, more than once. I think all but one city council member actually appeared. So we took that tack and we met and we decided, let's go meet with them. Well, early on, one member, I could mention her name, I guess, Regina Romero, actually submitted a proposal to the council, and they had a working group session on it. They ended up voting on it, and I don't have the specifics in front of me, but it basically attempted to codify our existence in a park, that we would have that right. And the vote occurred, and there were only 6 votes, and it came out 3-3. So there was no resolution on it. We continued to move forward. We felt if we could get 3, we could get possibly other members. So we worked through that legislative political process. We got to a certain point, and we thought we were going to be able to work something out. We got closer. We knew the concept of a free zone of assembly, free assembly zone, possibly in a park, would have merit. We had met with 4 or 5, I can't remember. I think we met, I didn't meet with all of them. We met with 4 of the representatives. They were all positively disposed to this concept. The new mayor was met with. He had some reservations about his term, and I'll say it because I think it's been mentioned more often than anything else he's probably said, is he had problems with after 10:30. Nothing good happens in a park after 10:30. So we knew we had that hurdle that we'd have to deal with.
You know, you mentioned something that's dear to my heart. What the mayor said, I save people in our trials for people that unfortunately are under old law, you have DUIs, and nothing good happens in this town after 10 o'clock, I think.
Well, he's picked up on your...
That's it? I don't think so. Okay.
So, yeah, just an opinion. But we were at the point where we saw what our next challenge was going to be, that we'd have to somehow convince the mayor that we'd work something out. And ideas were floated like maybe we could get a conditional kind of a thing going where it would be a 3-month permit to do this, and if we were on good behavior. So we were thinking about other alternatives. But as we were moving forward, our legal team, because we have a legal working group made up of attorneys who are members of the bar in Arizona, and they were having problems with these discussions that were going on because the courts were already engaged in this, and now we were working, in a sense, the other side of the street. And is this now going to cause some problems? We took their advice, strongly given to us, to back off. And at that point, which was a number of weeks ago, we've, in a sense, gone quiet on that initiative. We've subsequently picked up another initiative, which is to try to work on corporate personhood, which is one of the underpinnings of the occupation movement. Not forgetting what our other goal was, to be able to be in the park freely without encumbrances by law, as long as we were behaving all other laws. But it's been sidetracked. And I would say that that committee has some long-lasting, that working group has some long-lasting energy, and we feel that it's one of the most legitimate ways we can pursue many of our goals is to work with the existing structure of the community.
Incidentally, you mentioned some lawyers. That wasn't me part of that.
No, you weren't there.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I think that's probably all I have.
How about anything?
This one?
You said, sir, that your group deemed the park to be, and if I'm misquoting you, please correct me, our property, is that correct?
Not in relation to...
Isn't that what you said, sir? Our property?
I wasn't making reference to our group. It was as the city is our property.
And I'll ask you the same question I asked Mr. Crow too. You don't know how many people were discouraged from using the park by the presence of the occupiers, do you?
No.
Okay. You would agree with me that it's likely there were some?
I have no way of knowing.
Okay. So you don't agree with that?
I don't have an opinion of that. I would only surmise without going into, philosophizing about it. Something
Sir, you've been philosophizing here for 20 minutes. I think we're A-okay with you doing that.
Okay. Well, I would have to assume somebody else may have wanted to use the park, but I have no knowledge of any of those people in that. So it's an assumption on my part that it's possible somebody was kept away.
No,
I'll call Mary.
Address, but no, I don't have a residence.
Are you currently one of the people that is at the park and attend?
Yes.
I'd like you to give the judge a little bit about your background. First of all, your educational background and training.
I'm 55 this year. I grew up in a real small town in Nebraska. My father was a plumber. My mother was a housekeeper. I had 4 brothers, no sisters. I was the first in my family to complete college. I went to the University of Arizona. I don't know how detailed a history you want, but I grew up Episcopalian, sitting on the hard church benches, believing in love for my fellow man. Nebraska is a homesteader state where conditions were so harsh they had to give people the land to get them to settle there, put down roots, which is my family history. But as soon as the state started taxing people for their property, my grandfather was so outraged, he sold the land rather than pay the taxes on it. So my people are basically ignorant and lower income, hardworking, religious. I went to school at a Catholic school down the road from my small town my senior year so I could get out early and get out of town. I moved down to Lincoln, Nebraska, the capital, and went to work in the state capitol for my cousin who had won his Senate seat while he was stationed over in Vietnam. He had campaigned from a distance, and I helped him walking literature and doing campaign work. So I got out of school, graduated early, went down to the Capitol, worked there for a while, where I met a very charming reporter. He was the bureau chief for the Associated Press, quite a bit older than me, but I was kind of infatuated, and we ended up getting married. And unfortunately, like many reporters, he was a philanderer, and I didn't know that. And when I found out, it just so conflicted with my moral code that I got divorced. Okay, well, the point is that I have been involved politically a long time. On the Horatio Alger story of you work hard, you keep your nose clean, you get a good education, you succeed in life. So I did. I graduated magna cum laude with Phi Beta Kappa, Mortar Fourth, the whole 9 yards from University of Arizona.
Did you study with your degree in communication? What was your degree studying?
My first degree, because I wanted it to be widely applicable, was general studies, where I had an interdisciplinary emphasis in business, political science, and communication. And I did so well. I mean, I loved the educational environment, and I said, well, I might as well go on for my master's degree. I worked at the university in various administrative units, so I got tuition waivers. And it was easy to get classes. So I checked which of the degree programs had the highest national rankings. It was communication. So I got my master's degree in communication, studying the media coverage of Hillary Clinton. And then once I got that, I thought, well, shoot, I might as well go on for my PhD. I might as well be a doctor. And I applied to schools in Washington, D.C., because that's the heart of government. And I was accepted at George Washington University. I was one of the very few who was selected as a graduate teaching assistant. I got all my coursework done, my written exams, my oral exams. I was ready to do my dissertation on the influence that political spouses have on the decision making. And my father died. So I was the only daughter. I had no kids. Mom was all alone. She'd gone from her father's house to her husband's house and never lived alone in her life. So it made sense that I would be the one to help Mom with the adjustment. So I moved back to Nebraska thinking I could complete my degree from a distance, and I couldn't. So I gave up and bailed out. After 2 years where I got my mom back on track so she could take care of her own self, I moved down to Arizona, where I had some land in Cochise County next to my brother, and taught at a charter school down in Douglas, and then at the Cochise Community College between Douglas and Bisbee. And when I was at Cochise College, I was leading this federal program that was called Avanzando. Do you speak Spanish?
Not very well, see.
Well, Avanzando means advancing.
Okay.
And it was for kids like me who didn't have family who had gone to college before. So they didn't know the ropes. They didn't know how to succeed in college. So this class gave them the skills to remain engaged and be more productive members of society. Well, as part of the class, I was telling them, you set your goals. You work daily towards your goals. And I had to look in the mirror and say, you hypocrite. You wanted a PhD. You bailed out on it. And here you're telling the kids that they should remain true to their goals. So
I think that was the proper thing to do. Keep going.
Well, so when I got a chance, I attended a curriculum alignment seminar, to make sure that all of the institutions of higher education had similar standards and content for their courses. I met this wonderful man, Dr. Michael Dews, at the University of Arizona. He was the head of the communication department. And I thought, well, why not? Why not complete the degree? So I enrolled again in the communication program. And my dissertation this time was going to be on altruism, how the same act can be viewed differently by different people. You see somebody taking care of a neighbor's kid. One person's going to say, well, that's normal behavior. Anybody would do that. Somebody else will say, well, that's real suspicious. They probably have some ulterior motive. Somebody else would say, well, that's kooky. Why would anybody do anything that doesn't provide material reward? Somebody else would say, well, that's altruism. That's what we all should be doing. So I wanted to find out how much consensus there was out in the public about where to draw those lines between different types of behavior. And again, I completed all of my coursework. I was a graduate teaching assistant there. I got through my oral exams and my written exams, and I'm ready to do my dissertation. And politics came along and got in the way. I ran for, well, I first joined the Green Party to help Dave Proto with his mayoral race. I guess it's 5 years ago now, in 2007. And that kind of put my studies, sidelined them a little bit. Well, by the time that I was presenting my proposal for the dissertation, some of my faculty members had retired, and there wasn't a good match because it really was an interdisciplinary study again. It drew from anthropology and religious studies and psychology and communication. And by that time, I had lost faith in the educational process. I saw it as sort of a social club for the elite. I saw all of my fraternity boys and sorority girls doing really well, and the students who weren't as resource rich not being equally rewarded for it. And I got to thinking, well, I really don't need people to call me doctor anyway. I've gotten this marvelous education, and I don't need the credentials in order to demand respect for it. So Dave's race was in 2007. I ran for the Ward 3 City Council in 2009. 2010, we did Dave Ewald's campaign for Paula About's seat in the state legislature. This last year, 2011, Dave and I both ran for the Green Party mayoral candidate. I fortunately won the primary, and then Dave was my campaign manager for the general election. So long rich history in education, in politics, in civic engagement. I was vice president of my neighborhood association. I'm active with Code Pink. I'm coordinating the Peace Fair for the Tucson Peace Center this year. I stand with Women in Black. I go to the federal building for protests there Thursdays.
What was your intent of getting involved with the Occupy Tucson?
My intent was to join with others like me who feel that the system is rigged, that we don't have a fair chance at this.
And since you've been involved with it and have the communication background, I'd like to ask you, what's the message that occupying the park and being there, what's the message that is being sent out to the public?
That we need community, that we cannot rely on big business or on big government to solve our problems. We've got to get the general people back together again to reclaim our government, to serve us more effectively.
Are you getting feedback from the general public that they understand and perceive the message and what your group is about?
Yes, overwhelmingly. Letters to the editor, individual conversations, people wanting memorabilia, wanting the buttons and the stickers, the increased attendance at actions and more integration of the peace and social justice groups that exist in Tucson.
Has the larger Occupy movement had an effect on changing the political discussion and agenda even nationwide?
Absolutely.
In what way?
Well, if you, I know my group is familiar with the poll that was done recently on political knowledge, and the viewers of the late night comedy shows, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, were found to be more politically aware than viewers, consumers of the Fox News stations. And the late night comedy hosts have just satirized the elite privilege. Night after night after night, you hear the 99%, you hear Occupy. NPR has a regular segment on Occupy, letters to the editor. I gotten radio coverage from a station in Stony Brook, New York. I've gotten international coverage with Reuters. There's awareness, the editorial cartoons, the coverage in the paper, in the monthly magazines. It's all over the nation.
Are you aware of any alternative means that would be as successful as the occupation has been in getting your message out and communicating?
Well, if I were, I would be heart and soul into those other avenues. What I'm saying is I've tried the acceptable methods. I write letters to the editor. I call my elected representatives. I pass petitions. I start initiatives. I meet with groups. I have exhausted all of the typical and ordinary paths to impact governmental representation. This is something that was new and promising and really shows great hope. And we need it. Because I am so educated and addicted to information, I've read up, I've made myself aware of what is happening to our planet. Our very existence, our future is in peril through climate change and what's happening with extreme weather patterns. Economies are crashing all around the world, beginning over in Europe, but the dominoes are starting to fall. We've got another issue with peak oil, with extracting so much of the petroleum reserves, becoming so dependent on those resources that we are literally, socially, committing suicide.
And those issues that you just mentioned, are those issues that the occupied group that you participate in are discussing with the public and messaging and trying to get that information out to the wider public?
Absolutely, yes. Those, and as Dave said earlier, many, many more.
And then the occupied group has at the parks actually teaching and educational sessions, do they not?
Yes, they do. And not only the intellectual, the spiritual as well. We have meditation and yoga. We have creative, cultural facets as well.
Have you communicated with the city parks department concerning obtaining a permit to remain in the park, 24 hours?
Yes, certainly. I'm that rural, old school, go by the book, do things the way they're supposed to be done. I contacted the Parks Department. They will not give us a permit because the occupation, unlike other civic events, doesn't have a specific beginning and end time. Yeah, we have a beginning, but we're not going to be done next Tuesday at 5. We don't know how long this will take.
Yeah.
And because of that, we're ineligible. They will not give us a permit.
They also require you to have a...
insurance policy?
Yeah, how big an insurance policy?
$1 million. And I contacted an insurance company and said, okay, can we get an insurance policy? And I was told, no, we cannot. Peace Fair, because it's a single day event, we can have a permit, we can get insurance, but not occupy.
Oh. I think that's all the questions I have. Mary?
Mr. Camp, you're not here before the court today to deny that you were in the park after hours, are you?
No, sir. I went and took my ticket night after night. Even when there were only 2 arrests made, I made sure that I was one of them because of that by-the-book upbringing.
Okay. Nothing further, no?
Could I just add one more thing? Is that possible?
Sure.
Because I
Yes.
expected Mr. Merritt to ask me again about people being excluded from the park. And I would just like to say that if you watch the parks, there's 130 parks in Tucson. If somebody feels crowded out of one of them, they can always find another one. And I would argue that if you watch the surveillance tapes from those parks, you will find that during our occupation, we brought in a heck of a lot more people than ever used those parks previously. And if we did deny anybody access, it was their own fear, their own hang-ups that kept them out, because we welcome everyone. We make everybody feel that they are part of the community, that they have resources that we value and we would like to include.
I have a question for you, ma'am. That very same reasoning about the hundreds of parks in the city of Tucson, and they don't like it, they can go somewhere else, wouldn't that apply to your group?
We tried, we've been at 3 different parks.
Right.
We keep moving from place to place because they scatter us like field mice. They treat us like we are worthless. Everything in our society is gauged by the almighty dollar sign. How much are you worth? Well, what's your income? And if you don't have an income, you are deemed worthless. And we're tired of that. We believe that there is an intrinsic human value that we all share, that needs to be honored, that needs to be empowered, that we don't have another avenue to do that. We're sick of our people being chewed up and spit out and treated like garbage.
During your time with the Occupy Tucson movement, when it was occupying the parks, how many nights did you spend on the sidewalk, man?
I did not spend nights on the sidewalk.
Thank you.
I
You would
stayed
agree
in
with
the
me
park.
that the sidewalks are a public forum as well, isn't that correct? In fact, some of the people avail themselves of the sidewalk to avoid getting a citation, according to Mr. Coteau. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Right, so if you had chosen to, as you say, go by the book and do the, I forget how you phrased it, but it had something to do with the Nebraska upbringing, you could have walked the sidewalks all night, isn't that true?
Well,
Isn't
I've got
that
that Nebraska
Isn't that true, ma'am? It's a yes or no
up
question.
early in
It's a yes or no question, ma'am. Could you have done that? If you had chosen to do that, you could have walked the sidewalks with impunity, isn't that correct?
I suppose I could have walked the sidewalks
you.
all night
Nothing
long
further,
and been
ma'am.
called a streetwalker by
Nothing
the radio
further.
show.
Go right ahead, Bill.
Yes. As part of the effectiveness of the group and its political message, is there a benefit in being in a park that is observable to the public, that has a central location, versus being in a park on the outskirts of the city or an out-of-the-way location?
Yes, absolutely. And as far as the sidewalk goes, we had a symbolic presence there. We had enough people along the sidewalk, that tiny little restricted area that we were given. And I didn't feel that my energies would be best spent on hard ground. As soon as we got an easement, I was back.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Joe Bernick?
This is number 4, right? And Joe, raise your right arm. Is that where from Joe Tucson?
I do.
What's your full name, Joe?
My name is Joe
Bernie?
Bernick.
How do you spell it?
B as in boy, E-R-N-I-C-K.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And you live in Tucson, Mr. Bernick?
I've lived here since 1980. I live at 833 West Altura Street.
And would you maybe give the judge a little bit of capsule of what your background is as an active citizen involved with important public issues?
Yeah, I've been politically active since 1962. When I was 16 years old, I did my first protest kinds of things when I was out of high school in 1964. 17 years old, and I've been an activist, often full-time, more than full-time, 67 hours a week most of my life, with a semi-interruption when I was less active, when I spent 3 years in law school and became a father. But even then I was active politically. And before I moved here, it was Minnesota, except for my law school was in North Dakota. I lived in Minnesota during that time, and since I moved to Tucson, I've been very active in many organizations, including in the 80s, I was very active with the Southern Arizona Coalition for the Homeless, where we did a lot of camps with tents with homeless people and people that weren't homeless that camped out together. We didn't do them in parks, we did them in public buildings. We did the city hall, not the city maybe, but the county building, the old one. We did the state building, we did the federal building. Some of them lasted a long time, some of them lasted, we got busted the first night, it depended on the location. But when we were busted, the city magistrates threw it out and said we had the right to be there. Of course, these weren't parks. We did actions in all parks. I got to know a lot of the homeless people that are, some of them I even see at Occupy Tucson today. One of the things I learned, for instance, from working with homeless people is that Armory Park is a place where African American homeless people stand out, where a lot of Tucsonans are afraid to come. So it was very nice to see Occupy there and welcoming people and lots of people. Instead of people being afraid to go there, it became a place that people welcome, and these African American guys were happy. They were welcome too, and they could get to eat and have a place where they were safe to sleep. So that's part of my experience. I've mostly, though, been active in the peace movement for all these years. Before this year, for the previous 12 years, I coordinated the Tucson Peace Fair, but from about the mid-90s until a couple of years ago, I worked with the Tucson Peace Action Coalition. We coordinated large demonstrations for several years, 3 a year, including in 2003 we had big demonstrations of one had 6,000 people. I coordinated that. I've done a lot of those actions, small ones, big ones, but in all my experience, only once did we ask for a permit, and the one time we asked for a permit and we were given permission to be at Catalina Park. That's the park on 4th Avenue, about a block south of Speedway between 4th and 5th Street. The one time we got permission, we were asked to leave. So even though we had permission. Every other time, we don't ask permission. We have a First Amendment right. It was respected. And I'm talking about over 100 large demonstrations, and both the Coalition of Homeless, peace demonstrations, labor actions, because I was also vice president of one of the teachers' locals here, union locals here, and I've done a lot of labor stuff. The ones I coordinated, my experience is that we have First Amendment right as long as we're not asking for exclusive use. If we're asking for exclusive use, for example, I worked with some of the things on immigrant rights, and the issues with immigrant rights, you ask for exclusive work. You know, the immigrants ask for exclusive use of the park because they want to keep out these guys who walk around with guns, the right-wingers that walk around with guns and threaten and disrupt, and they have an interest in keeping them out. But peace demonstrations, we've never had to do this with Coalition of Homeless things. We never did this. Labor actions, we've never had a reason to ask for exclusive use because the public is welcome and the public is generally sympathetic, and we don't mind having some verbal arguments and stuff with a few people that disagree with us. Generally, counter-protesters, if they're smart, they go across the street, because if a few people join your big demonstration, it just looks like you have more people. So that's my experience in these movements, that what drew me to Occupy, and I'm not a participant in Occupy, but I'm a supporter, and I've cooked several meals for them, and I bring them down, and I throw money in things. And one is getting to know Mary, and she didn't mention it, but her house was foreclosed, and she became homeless, and she was down there sleeping in a tent because she needed a place to sleep, and that's the prop. At demonstrations, you often have props that fit the demonstrations. Labor unions have certain kinds of signs. Other demonstrations, sometimes we have puppets. Sometimes, different demonstrations have different kinds of props that fit the message that you're trying to get across. So when you're protesting foreclosures, which Occupy does all the time, foreclosures and homelessness and poverty, sleeping in a tent and having to have a place to sleep is the prop, is the exact thing that goes along with it, like the protest we had back in the 90s, and that's part of the thing. And Sometimes, for instance, we have a peaceful demonstration. We don't have a permit to use the street, but sometimes the police allow us to use the street, even though it disrupts traffic and even though it's against the law. And without a permit, we've often been allowed. We've had big demonstrations like that big one I was talking about, and they let us march the whole length of Speedway on a Saturday morning down Speedway. It gave us a whole lane. That disrupted traffic that was against the law. Now, of course, sometimes you get some youth that are hot-headed, and they just can't, they want to do something because it's the day the war starts or something. So they take to the street. We're on a sidewalk, and they take to the street, and they get arrested. They understand that they're going to get penalized. And sometimes you break the law knowing, and I've also have done civil disobedience. I got arrested inside the federal building once protesting something, but I got convicted and I had a year's probation. But in those kinds of instances, you know you're violating the law, and there's a compelling reason that they're not going to let me stay inside the IRS office after closure. I understand that. So I understand also from my legal standing, and that aided me in all these activities, that there has to be a compelling reason to disregard the First Amendment rights. A compelling reason, not just a reason, as the city attorney says. There has to be a compelling reason, because First Amendment rights are overwhelming. I mean, this is a very, very, very important right that our founding fathers insisted on before they approved the Constitution. And I think we need, and that's always been our assumption whenever we hold actions, that we can only be restricting if there's compelling reasons.
Let me interrupt you and ask a couple questions.
Sure.
Because you've been around a long time. How many demonstrations do you think that you participated in?
Participated in or helped organize?
Participated in demonstrations.
Oh,
approximately.
in 50 years, probably 2 a week.
2 a week?
Maybe not. Not the first. The last 30 years, probably an average demonstration. No, maybe not 2 a week. 2, 3 a month.
Okay.
Last 30 years.
How many of those were after 10 o'clock at the park?
After 10 o'clock at the park,
I mean, excluding what we're all going through here. With Occupy.
excluding Occupy, maybe a handful.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joe. I didn't mean to.
Yeah. So, and they weren't with tents. Okay. Although, yeah. The ones we did with tents were also public places, but not they just didn't happen to be in parks because we were directly petitioning government, and they were much more disruptive. And when we do a demonstration, we understand that it creates a certain hardship. Of course, sometimes the biggest hardship to the citizens is the huge amount of money that that the city spends on the police, because you go to a peaceful demonstration where historically, like I do the Peace Fair, I did it for 12 years, and one year, the exact year that the budget, crisis, the city budget crunch hit the paper and everything. So all of a sudden, that's the year they decided to have a meeting with us, and the city has 12 people, 5 cops in uniforms, and all these city people, and we have a meeting. Here's an event that's been held for, this year is the 30th, on a 30th Peace Fair. We've never had an incident. This was maybe the 25th. And 25 years, you never have an incident, and all of a sudden they have this big budget crunch. So all of a sudden the city decides to take 5 cops in uniform and all these other people and have a meeting and spend all this money when you've never had a problem. They've never had it since. I mean, there has to be reason, and demonstrations. We have a demonstration at a public building, and it does interfere with people having access to the building. Of course it does. It's a crowd. You have like I say, sometimes you take a lane of traffic. The city cops actually ask you to. There's all kinds of ways that exercising your First Amendment right, or any right that we have, might interfere with people's rights. And we try to take that into consideration when we plan things, because we don't want to make enemies with the public. We want to, when you're petitioning the government, you're also trying to reach out to the public. And I could see that with Occupy Tucson. They not only welcome the public to come, that's the purpose. So the purpose is to engage the public. The purpose in this kind of a demonstration, like when we used to do the homeless camps, the purpose is not only to invite homeless people to come and participate, but also to involve the public, just curious people, to come by and learn and participate, in the action and in the camp itself, or come and talk. And it's an invitation to the public, because we're trying to influence public officials and government, but we're also trying to influence public opinion, like most actions.
Is part of the occupying a space with these political objectives part of the message itself?
Well, if you want to demonstrate homelessness, if you want to demonstrate that Mary lost her house and she needs a place to do, putting her in a tent overnight, where she, in a tent, not on the sidewalk in a sleeping bag, but in a tent where you can actually pitch a tent, is a demonstration that's very clear. It's a prop, and it's a very clear illustration of homelessness and one of the ills of our country that there's no excuse for. We didn't have homelessness during the Nixon administration. I mean, why should we have homelessness now? And so definitely so all these things are props to making the point.
Other than pride, isn't part of it that there's a series of issues that aren't being addressed, that must be addressed or need to be addressed, and sort of occupying a space, saying, "Hey, we're here. These are issues," and
well, a camp
the public and the politicians need to pay attention.
A tent camp is by definition that, but there's other ways to do that too. Yeah, that's one way to protest. Sometimes you, just by having a venue for the protest, you're doing that. You always have a venue, but often you pick your venue. If you're demonstrating against immigration policy, I've been to demonstrations where the immigration office is down there by the base. You go there, or the border patrol station at Ajo. We do a peace vigil in front of the federal building every Thursday since 1981, and I go to most of those. And we do that in front of the federal building because that represents the federal government, and it's a foreign policy issue. So you do that, so you pick a venue, and if it's a tent city, if it's a camp out, then that has to be an occupation. So it depends on the venue and what the props are and what kind of a protest you're doing.
In your experience, has the Occupy movement nationwide been singularly successful?
I checked last night. I went on Google, and billions and billions of things came up. So obviously more than anything in the last year politically. So it's the #1 American issue of the year by 1,000,000 times more than the second. So it's obviously, that's clear that it's been a great issue.
That's all I have.
Did I understand you, sir, to say that you're trained in the law?
I'm trained. I never took a bar exam. I've never been able to pass a bar.
Are you familiar with the concept of stare decisis?
I don't remember the Latin exactly.
You would agree with me that the law is a living, growing thing?
Of course.
Okay, so you would agree that it evolves over time?
Of course.
Okay. So,
everything does.
If I understood you correctly, your belief is that Mary's purpose is she needed a place to sleep. That's the reason she's in the tent down there.
No.
Well,
I didn't say
correct me if I'm
that.
wrong here. You said she's down sleeping in a tent because she needed a place to sleep.
Figuratively.
Well, I guess she didn't make that clear.
She did need a place to sleep. But
Okay.
It's not like she didn't have alternatives. Yeah.
Thank you.
She had, how many parks are there in Tucson?
We had no friends,
Yeah.
relatives. Several would have taken me, and I
Yeah,
chose
yeah.
that path.
Okay, Mary, we'll do that.
Sorry.
Can I continue?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that none of the, or a handful, I think you said, over 30 years, were in the parks. Where did those occur? Were those here in Tucson?
Some of them, yeah.
And you stayed overnight in the park?
No.
Okay. I guess nothing else, Sharon. Thank you.
No.
Thank you, sir.
I don't have any other testimony to offer, Judge.
Okay, now let's go back then. I guess it's your motion. You wish to argue the motion some more, sir?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
I think there's any of us probably that aren't aware of some really major issues facing the country, if not, the planet. There's phenomenal economic problems that the country has. Unemployment is a huge problem. You have different solutions as to how to get there, but we would all recognize that that's a big problem. In Tucson, you can't be blind to the fact that global warming is going to affect us. That's a major problem. You can't be in this city and not be aware of the problems of the foreclosures and so forth. These are issues that generally are affecting the public. And in our democratic system, people need to be able to come together and to discuss issues, to talk to their neighbors, to organize, to get messages out. And, it's in the Arizona Constitution, we actually kind of break up the free speech and assembly. We have Section 5 of our rights in Arizona is that the right of petition and of the people peaceably to assemble for the common good shall never be abridged. It's part of our Constitution in Arizona that all of the political power is inherent in the people and governments there to serve the people. It's part of our Constitution that the provisions are mandatory in our Constitution. So there really, if society is to progress, if society is to deal with the issues and to do so in a peaceable community manner, we've made a decision. And our decision is that among our most important rights is the ability to speak freely, the ability to discuss ideas, and the right to assemble for those purposes. So we have here a kind of a hierarchy. The hierarchy in our system is that the people have these rights, and then our Constitution puts those rights in big letters. You've got the right to assemble. You've got the right to freedom of speech. And to exercise those rights, where do you do it? The cases are clear. We all know that the penultimate area for assembling and exercising rights are public spaces. Maybe you can have a meeting down at the Unisource Tower, but then they tell you to leave. The streets are public, but that's not quite so useful for your teach-ins and your organizing and stuff. So really, parks are the place where it's best suited and has historically been used and is best suited for the assembly and exercise of political rights. Now, the city has asked some questions, like maybe was there somebody that wanted to use a park that didn't and stuff. But they've offered no evidence. They've offered no evidence of interference with the public, actually with the park, a group that wasn't able to use the park, a failure to accommodate other needs with the park, damage to the park. They've offered absolutely none of that evidence. So what we have is a city ordinance that, I don't know how easy it would be for me to dig it out, but this city ordinance, when you look at it, Judge, everything in there that it's related to is like said before, there'll be rules they have on if you want to have a rodeo here, you want to have your sell beer in the park, you want to do this and that, they've got rules for that. They're here, and I don't know if you, I think you may even be able to take some judicial notice of this. But it's sort of an interesting thing to me that, like for instance, Dick Kaiser talked about how his case had been dismissed. There were some 200 cases or more that have been dismissed from Armory Park. And it's...
Isn't that because of lack of guns?
Lack of signs, yeah. So it's kind of interesting to me where, you know, the city comes in and they say, well, you know, this is content neutral, these rules. Well, that's true in the sense that what they're suggesting is it violates everyone's political rights in that park, regardless of what it may be. And they gave a couple of hundred tickets for violating an ordinance that said there needs to be a sign posted, even when there wasn't a sign posted. So to me, that's kind of a reflective of it's kind of like a motive where they're hostile to the political expression, hostile to free speech, which is pretty normal with government. But I think that's a bit of what we're seeing there. But in any event, we have the biggest and the most important of our rights that are most useful for the public to be able to assemble for the common good. And the city has a 1030 rule that they've offered no evidence as to the purpose of the utility of that rule. On the other hand, the Occupy people, it's part of the message, it's part of the success of the group to be able to say, look, we're occupying this space. There's issues that aren't being addressed on the agenda nationally and locally, issues that are important to the community and the people that we want discussed, and we want those issues addressed, and we want to be in a public space that's prominent where it can be seen what we're doing so that our message can get out. And we've shown that they have a message that is getting out. The public perceives, the public understands what the Occupy group is about. The public understands when they come in, you have actual evidence of it when they come in and they're giving contributions to it. People stop by and say, we can't be here all the time, but we're supporting of you. We have thousands of people on the Facebook that say, we're following, we're friending you, we're watching what's going on. So really, we have an important, needed, successful, communicative political movement where a group of people are assembling for the common good. And absolutely, this kind of activity must be supported by the courts. The oath you and I took as a lawyer, all of us, is to support the Constitution, support the right of the people, give room to breathe so that the political expression and the discussion of issues can go on. And on the other side of that, we have nothing that is in front of you except in an ordinance dealing with other stuff, somebody says 1030's the limit. And that deference to that small little rule cannot override the social importance and the high level of the Constitution and political rights that are involved. Thanks, Judge.
Let me ask this question on the ordinance, Will. The ordinance itself has punishment at the end, the 6-month deal. In fact, it says in there that the rangers can eject certain people if they violate what's in there. I'm talking about politics right now. But, for instance, they do swimming, they visit areas, if they don't do it, they can eject them.
Yeah.
You don't have any problem if somebody does puts a huge battleship on the pond out there, that could be stopped by the police, for instance. I mean, these are, you have no problem with these being legislated by the city that's in here. I'm not talking about your case.
No, I don't have a problem with that. I understand that it's in the public interest to have, park rules. I understand that.
This is not prohibited, politicizing in a park, is it?
No.
Except by the 1030. You can go politic and you have free speech and you can assemble at any park at any time for like 16 hours a day.
That's absolutely correct.
It's the 8 hours that bothers you, we folks here.
It is the 8 hours that bothers us.
Yeah.
And the reason is because that really affects the effectiveness of the group. It affects the message of we're occupying here because these are issues that need to be dealt with. It affects the number of people that are involved with it. It affects activities that are useful to the group that occurs later at night. So in fact, it's the 24-hour occupation is an important part of the First Amendment message of what's going on.
Right, actually, just the application itself.
Yeah, and the city's not giving you any reason to what, I mean, maybe you think nothing good happens till after 10, but there's been some good political discussions there, There's stuff that is important to that group, and that's why I think, when Dick Kaiser was talking about, I mean, the city should sit down and say, hey, look, let's look at a set of rules that contemplate some political activities and what can we learn from this. But these rules here are not the results of thought out kind of information. I put in one of the legal arguments, but it's certainly, you can see how it works in this case. It wasn't even the city that, a city council mayor didn't discuss a 1030 rule. They gave Fred Gray or whoever's the parks guy, you can come up with rules. Well, maybe, the parks guy can come up with a lot of rules that might violate the First Amendment and the right to assembly. And we say that as applied, this violates the First Amendment and the assembly rights of these people.
Thank you. Okay, Alan?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the fact of the matter is, whether Mr. Reisner and his group like it or not, government may impose reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on speech even in a public forum. The restrictions got to be content neutral, got to be narrowly tailored to servicing every governmental interest, and there have to be ample opportunity for alternative means of communication and information. We've heard no end of testimony here today about what went on in Armory Park and how they're followed on Facebook, and more to the point, the public forum, the sidewalks are always available. And you heard testimony here today that they actually left the park, stood on the sidewalk to avoid the citation. I submit to the court, if you want to be there 24 hours a day, then you walk the sidewalks. That's what better way. Wouldn't that get you on the news? Wouldn't your friends on Facebook be even more amazed to see at 3 o'clock in the morning a group of people parading around Diente de Agosto Park in support of this movement? So there is ample opportunity to do that and still work within the confines of the law. Our city code is content neutral, Judge, and therefore it's subject to less scrutiny. The city ordinance at issue is not enacted or was enacted or proposed because we disagreed with the defendant's message. This ordinance has been around for decades. It is It empowers the city to administer the parks for the good of all people. And throughout this testimony, I was struck today how this group and these people have decided that to put their interests before the interests of the general public, and to substitute their judgment for the way the parks should be managed for the elected officials. And they've offered no evidence that they have any expertise in how to manage parks. So when the elected
They have a right to speak.
I'm sorry?
They have a right to speak.
Absolutely have a right to
And
speak.
if I'm wrong, and I think that there should be no government at all, I have a right to go out.
Absolutely have that right. 16 and a half hours a day. You just can't do it in the park during the time the park is closed. So the code's silent on the point of views expressed by the defendant, Your Honor. It's absolutely content neutral. Through Mr. Reisner's pleadings, he mentions more than once that it never envisions political talk. That's exactly right. It's blind politics. It's there to administer the parks for the good of the people and the citizens of Tucson. It applies to any park. And it applies to any person or group that are using the parks. So it's administered in an even-handed manner. As far as being narrowly tailored to a significant government interest, Your Honor, the regulations for the use of the public forum and assure the safety and convenience of the people are not inconsistent with civil liberties, but are one of the means of safeguarding the good order on which those civil liberties depend. That's from Thomas B. Chicago Park District, Your Honor. It's in our plea. I invite the court to read that. The government has a significant governmental interest in keeping these parks attractive and in intact condition, readily available to the people who wish to see and enjoy them by their presence. That's Clark for the communication of creating nonviolence. Again,
Do they have, does Clark talk about a time limit that they cut off?
as a matter of fact, they do, Your Honor. On the National Mall, they wanted to camp overnight. That was, prohibition against that was upheld in that very case.
I'll read on the case.
This code does not burden more speech than is necessary. It only closes the park from 10:30 till the morning hours. After night. The sidewalks, as I've said before, always available. So at least 2/3, a little more than 2/3 of every day, they can go there, they can protest, they can have their tents. I thought it was telling that we're insistent on 24-hour occupation, but yet when Ms. DeCamp was on the stand, she said there were only 2 of us in the park. So it seems to me, as Mr. Crow, it seems to me that one of the witnesses said that these tents are props. It seems to me that an empty tent serves the same purpose. That's the case. But the point, more to the point, Your Honor, is the city has the right to regulate the parks.
Okay, so
And we've done that in a content-neutral fashion in accordance with
I suppose
Constitution.
the ordinance and that these folks can put their tents, leave their tents at night, but not occupy the tents. And put
That's what they have done, Your Honor, whether or not we permit it.
Okay, I haven't visited, put signs all over, that's okay, right? Any expression of free speech can be.
They have done that in contravention of the law, Your Honor. It doesn't matter what I say here today.
They can't put their tents up.
They have put their tents up. They can't be in the park after 10:30. They can't camp in the
Right,
park.
they can put their tents up and you're,
And take them down, sure.
no, and they can put signs up all over.
Sure.
You just want them out by 10:30.
I don't want them out. That's what the city council wants.
That's what the Parks Director wants.
Well, the city council appointed the park director and delegated to him the authority to administer the parks.
The Koch brothers can put $100 million in and buy TV time, and unlimited amount of money can go into this and that and that. But how do people without those funds, how can they be effective? You know, you've heard testimony how some kind of demonstrations, you've got signs, you try to do this, try to do that. This, for these people, this is effective. And they really don't have alternative means that are anywhere near as effective.
Isn't that just more or less their opinion that's effective? You got these statistics. outside of the Facebook and the 1,000 or 100,000 tune in or something? Is that what's being effective? Is
No,
just
no.
getting to the people?
No, actually, there were some statistics, and I had some testimony about that, of the level of contributions and involvement with the group. It is dramatically effective when they're not in a park where there's not a locus for the group. Having that locus and 24 occupation is effective and central to the whole message. That's you've seen that probably in the news, just in general knowledge from New York and other places. This Clark case is interesting. It was a 1984 opinion by Berger from the U.S. Supreme Court. This involved the mall in Washington, and they get a lot of demonstrations in the mall. So the Parks Department, in fact, has worked for years and has some rules and tailored stuff relating to the rules on the mall. And there was this was creative nonviolence group, whatever it was, but they had an encampment on the mall with tents, and they had a permit, and they were allowed to be there 24 hours a day. They were allowed to be there at night. They weren't allowed to sleep in the tent. That was a park rule. And so what the Supreme Court said a couple things. One is they said, look, we assume that sleeping there is in fact symbolic speech. But we're going to approve the Park Service's ability to regulate it in this location because this is the national mall of the United States. We have foreign visitors coming in. We have the museums along the side. We've got this and we've got that going on. And so because of the very uniqueness to the nation of this one mall, we're going to uphold the regulation in spite of the fact that we agree that that sleeping is, we assume it's First Amendment symbolic speech. That's not Armory Park. That's not Pancho Villa Park. The Banqueta Agosto Park isn't this unique central and national mall. And so the Clark case is certainly a case that we all have to live with. But that's what that case turned on. The D.C. Court of Appeals ruled in favor of sleeping there 24 hours. The Supreme Court changed, but the reason was because of the uniqueness of the mall. Thank you.
Okay. I will take it under advisement because I want to read the briefs early, read the cases that you cited. We just got these this morning. They just gave them to me all. So I'll take it under advisement.